And plus, there's lots happening on.
Speaking of
Yep.
podcasts,
Speaking of podcasts, should we go
big news.
big $100 million big news? Um, Joe Rogan.
I decided that I'm going to start with a clip.
Do it.
Hello, everybody. I have an announcement. The podcast is moving to Spotify. I signed a multi-year licensing agreement with Spotify that will start on September 1st. Starting on September 1st, the entire JRE library will be available on Spotify as well as all the other platforms. Then somewhere around the end of the year, it will become exclusive to Spotify, including the video version of the podcast.
JRE, who was that? Joe Rogan Experience.
What do you think? Do you think he should have waited for YouTube to come back with something better? I mean, I'm guessing Spotify isn't the only platform that went after him, right? I'm guessing Twitch probably tried something. Who else is up there? Maybe Twitter would have tried something. Is Spotify?
I mean, what is the arrangement with YouTube? Like, why would YouTube pay for his
Because
content when he's already on there for free?
now he's gonna leave and take everything with him, right? They could have made him a YouTube exclusive, like YouTube Red exclusive only. You know what I mean? And he would have to take down his content from, podcasting would have to stop and things like that. So they could have made it exclusive, and Google could have afforded that. It blows my mind that Spotify has this much money.
All right, so I didn't realize how big Joe Rogan was. I mean, I think we both knew he was quite big. Didn't realize how big. Do we want to go through some of the numbers? Currently has 190 million downloads a month. That's bigger than most networks out there, like TV, free-to-air networks.
That's half of America, right?
190 million. That is more than half?
Yeah, more than half.
It's more than half America. According to Forbes, he made $30 million alone last year on advertising. I mean, he might still get that because on Spotify, it's not entirely clear whether there'll be ads on top of him being exclusive to Spotify. So it's $30 million a year plus the $100 million from Spotify for their licensing cost.
Interesting.
That's kind of nuts, right? He's double dipping there.
Double dipping. And this doesn't.
But that's the model.
This doesn't happen immediately. This happens in October.
He said September, so I think he said September 1st. Okay. Yeah. So I think we kind of speculated whether YouTube will be coming down as well, but that is. So he's basically giving his audience, what is it now? We've got towards the end of May, so he's got June, July, 3 months, about 3 months to get everyone to move across. And you can only, if you want the experience, the Joe Rogan experience, you have to download the Spotify app.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to pay for the premium Spotify to listen to this.
Really?
But you need the app.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm guessing he's dropping his podcast as well, right? Because everything goes on Spotify. No longer becomes like a free to grab RSS feed like most other podcasts.
Oh, interesting question, Kelvin. So what do you mean by that? Dropping the podcast, you mean the RSS feed?
So you can only get it through Spotify.
Yeah. So for us podcasting gigs, that's what a podcast is. It's an RSS feed, which is open and anyone can use it. You can put it anywhere. So any of these millions of podcatcher apps, like the one we like is Overcast and what was the other one?
Or Casts.
Pocket Cast, yes. I just know it by the icon. I always forget the name of it. There's, Podchaser. I think our SEO is really good for Podchaser, I think, for some reason. But yeah, none of these players will be able to have Joe Rogan because it'll be some sort of magical feed that Spotify is going to introduce.
Yeah. And it's worth looking into, just going through the history of podcasting again. Started by Adam Curry of the No Agenda Show. And all it is it's a public...
The Podfather.
It is a public feed that runs off, one of these podcast hosts or your website like we do it. And you can just pick up a player to read that file. And whenever, Jeff does his amazing production work and he puts it out there, we put it out in the RSS feed. Your podcast capture tool, player just picks it up and it checks it once in a while. So it's free. It really still embodies the essence of what the internet was designed for, right? Like everything is out there. Everyone can share and learn. You don't pay for anything. So it's rubbing a lot of people the wrong way. Some people are saying he sold out, but to be honest, we all would have jumped on the 100 mil. And people are saying he's being greedy because he's already making 30, but he's helping Spotify start off an entire video arm that could one day rival YouTube. You would definitely do that, right?
Possibly, yeah. Well, I don't know about. At least, I think the video part is secondary to Spotify. I mean, eventually, yes, they want to get there, but like at least for the next 3-4 years, I think they'll be far behind YouTube. But yeah, I think Spotify might have that. I think we talked about it last week as well, like the interactive video format. Now, you mentioned Adam Curry there. Like he was actually on his show about just before, well, just as the whole COVID thing was happening, and the impact of that to Adam Curry's podcast,
Yes.
No Agenda, is quite amazing. So I don't know if you heard this, but like they get about 10,000 a week downloads. After his experience on Joe Rogan, I think some 8 weeks later, now it's gone up by 18,000%. So it's like it hasn't just doubled, and this is the power of Joe Rogan
18
right now.
times. Oh, wait, 18,000%.
180 times. 180 times.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's
I'd be
incredible.
happy
Yeah.
with 18 more listeners.
So that's our goal. That's our growth
Yep.
strategy. Get on Joe Rogan.
I think it's worth
make
now
that
to
happen.
spend a little bit of time to learn a bit more about Joe Rogan. And lately, Russell Brand has been appearing on my YouTube feed. Now, this guy is trippy. He's obviously into psychedelics, just like Joe is, so he can waffle on a little bit. But I thought we start off with this little insight. If you could play the clip on what Russell Brand's view is on JRE.
Obviously, my podcast is on Luminary. Some time ago, we sold our podcast Under the Skin to a platform, and I always felt a bit dodgy about it, because the internet space, you're used to getting for nothing. But YouTube, where you're probably watching this now, obviously, sells advertising. And Instagram, if you're watching it there, you're being corralled and marketed to. In a sense, as long as we all live under the economic auspices of capitalism, then those are the rules of the game, unless you want to set up exempted and parallel universes. Now, I reckon Joe Rogan moving to Spotify is significant. I reckon it's a game changer. I always fought for online subscription model podcast platforms to work. They needed to get Joe Rogan or someone comparable, and there isn't really anyone comparable. Maybe Mark Maron, but not really anymore. Rogan's a sort of a unique thing. It's going to be weird that his stuff won't be on YouTube anymore, and apparently I got from that, was it called Valuetainment? Very good channel, very interested in Valuetainment. They said Spotify are gonna have set up a video arm just to deal with it.
Yeah. So what he's trying to say is basically you follow the money, right? This is capitalism. People are paying money for content. Whether you are paying for Netflix or Disney or Stan, whatever it might be, Spotify wants to charge you for content, and they're gonna, if they want this whole podcasting thing to work out, they're gonna need a Joe Rogan.
Let me play a quick follow-up clip to that. It's a little bit funny. So this is from Joe Rogan's intro. So if you go to Spotify, like up until early this week, you weren't able to search for Joe Rogan on Spotify, but now you can. This is what comes up, and this is at the end of his intro.
We're very excited to begin this new chapter of the JRE, and I hope you're there when we cross over. Thanks.
I don't know why I said that. But yeah, crossing over to what, Joe? So yeah, I think basically crossing over to capitalism and dollar signs. That's fine. He's done well for himself. He's obviously, hit something to the general public, right? So his views can be quite off center. He's a fan of Elon Musk, and Elon is pretty much close to being cancelled right now. He's got to be careful. And I thought by going on Joe and talking about how we should free America and all that sort of stuff, I thought I was really scared for him going into it. It wasn't so bad the last time, which was a couple of weeks ago. I've also been listening to a bunch of other podcasts, obviously, and a lot of theories about why, this is happening, like why Spotify is so interested in podcasts. I think Ashley Carmen here from the Vergecast pretty much hit the nail on the head here.
The reason Spotify cares so much about podcasts is because with music streaming, which is what we typically think of when we think of Spotify, the company has to pay per listen. So every time you listen to Rihanna, they have to pay Rihanna's record label. With podcasts, it's making money on every listen, at least for its exclusive shows. And for the non-exclusive shows, it doesn't have to pay anything.
Right. So I think the licensing cost or the fee, I think, is the important thing here. So whereas Spotify, pays the licensing cost per listen, this is just, in a way, getting the biggest podcaster in the world. And I think people don't really see Joe as a podcaster as such. He's more of a video on YouTube. I think most people would watch it on YouTube. I mean, I do, certainly. His episodes are so long that it's very rare that, you could listen to that for 4 hours, right? I think some of those conversations go for 4 hours. So, this is a huge play for Spotify. They're being really bold. This is on the back of spending $400 million on acquiring Gimlet Media, Parcast, and The Ringer. And that's pretty much sort of the top 3 or 4 segments of podcasting, which is crime, murders, and sports, and Joe Rogan, which is a category in itself.
Yeah, and I think to end this segment, Russell has a very interesting view on why Joe is popular. He's a Democrat. He interviews people. He interviews some of the most controversial people on the internet. So play the clip, and then we can talk about what makes Joe special.
About this, I think he's an interesting cultural figure because I think a lot of what he's doing is men's wellness and men's spirituality. I think it's interesting when there's been controversies around Joe Rogan, like when he endorsed Bernie Sanders and the left didn't want that endorsement, or parts of the left. That for me showed that an interesting moment in the evolution of politics and somewhat the end of conventional left-right, liberal, conservative, right-wing, left-wing understanding of politics. Rogan, he has people on there that are the scourge of liberalism, but people, I think, whose voices you want to see in conversation. I'm well up for talking to people with different viewpoints from me, and Rogan himself has always said he's voted Democrat his whole life, so what is that? But what I think is significant about him is with his connections to UFC and his interest in hunting and all that kind of stuff, and wellness and supplements, he kind of represents an aspect of men's health that men's health is usually about physical stuff, isn't it? Being fit, doing weights, cycling, hunting, stuff to do with the body. But because of his interest in psychedelics, he's sort of in at least the consciousness aspect, and you could argue the spiritual aspect of wellness by virtue of that. He said before that he would never call himself an atheist because what do we know? And anyone who takes psychedelics, it just opens up a lot of questions.
Yeah, a bit of a long clip, but I never saw Joe as, the sort of the embodiment of men's mental, health and whether he was a strong spokesperson for that. I mean, I always knew he was into psychedelics, and that's what got Elon Musk into trouble because he was smoking weed on the podcast. And I never saw him that way, and I think, to me, the thing that stands out most about Joe Rogan is he chats to people he may not agree with. And he chats to people who necessarily don't have a voice. He's chatted to the guy who does Hanson Robotics, who's kind of odd, doing some of the best robotics around. He's interviewed politicians.
Has Sophia been on it?
I don't know, but even Sophia might be too weird for Joe Rogan.
I want to see it happen.
But he's just got.
She's our favorite robot, by the way, listeners.
Check it out. She creeps me out. I don't know. He just has a way of getting people just to talk about their work, their projects, their passions, that a lot of people can't do, right?
I mean, we're trying to do some of that. I mean, obviously we don't have guests as much as we've had guests, but we don't not as much as Joe Rogan or some of the other podcasts. But I think this is the power of this medium. And if you think about it, yeah, sure, a lot of people watch it on video like I do, but I'm kind of listening to it in the background almost. You don't need the video, right? And sometimes when they show stuff on the screen, they don't actually show it on the screen. They're just sort of talking about it, about what they're seeing on the screen. But the biggest power of Joe Rogan was, I think, this whole lockdown started when they had this epidemiologist on, like sort of early March, and that's when everyone started freaking out, and it was on the back of that appearance on Joe Rogan. People think that that's what sort of got everyone over the edge. I mean, there were a lot of studies done at the time, all this modeling and all that sort of hoopla, but Joe Rogan changes the world, just like podcasting.